Beyond the neon horizon lies a place where the past and the future finally meet in a burst of light and color. Join our journey into the unknown as we explore the stories of those who dared to cross the line. Click subscribe now and follow us toward the next big revelation. My son stood up from his chair at the restaurant table, pointed his finger directly at my chest, and said in a voice loud enough for the entire room to hear, "You're an embarrassment, Dad. Margaret's husband actually built something with his life. You just wasted yours." The table went quiet. My daughter looked at her plate. My son-in-law smiled into his wine glass. And Margaret, my ex-wife, pressed her lips together in that way she always did when she was trying not to look pleased. I didn't say a word. I picked up my coffee cup, took a slow sip, and set it back down on the saucer with a quiet, deliberate click. They thought they were watching a man absorb a humiliation. They had no idea they were watching a man make a decision. Before I tell you what happened next, I want to ask you something. If you've ever been written off by the people who were supposed to know you best, hit that like button and subscribe. Because what I'm about to tell you is something I should have done a long time ago. My name is Robert Calloway. I am 64 years old. I live in Ottawa, and on the night my son told me I had wasted my life, I was sitting in a booth at a restaurant in Westboro that my daughter had chosen because, as she put it, it was casual enough that Dad won't feel out of place. I heard that. I was meant to hear it. My son's name is Daniel. He's 38. He works in finance in Toronto, and he married a woman named Priya 3 years ago. Priya is sharp, ambitious, and she has decided, within the first 6 months of knowing me, that I am a problem to be managed, rather than a person to be known. My daughter is Claire. She's 35. She still lives in Ottawa, which I once thought meant something. She's been with a man named Kevin for 4 years. Kevin works in government and speaks exclusively in acronyms. My ex-wife, Margaret, left me 11 years ago. She said I lacked ambition. She said the business I'd spent 20 years building was just a small thing, and she needed to be with someone who was going somewhere. She found that person in a man named Elliot Chambers, who is a commercial developer in Vancouver with a voice like a television presenter and a handshake that communicates, before he said a single word, that he considers himself exceptional. Elliot was at the dinner that night too. He was sitting at the head of the table, which was interesting because it wasn't his table. He had simply positioned himself there when we sat down, and no one said anything. He wore a blazer that probably cost more than my first car. His watch was the kind that gets mentioned in conversations about watches. He was 61 years old, and he looked like a man who had spent a great deal of money trying to look like a man who didn't need to spend money. "Robert," he said when I arrived, extending that handshake. "Great to finally get a proper sit-down. Margaret talks about you." I very much doubted that. The dinner started the way these dinners always start when your family has quietly reorganized itself around the belief that you are the least successful person at the table. There was the performance of including me, which is worse than being excluded. Elliot talked about a development project in Kelowna. Margaret talked about the condo they'd just bought in Phoenix. Daniel talked about a client whose portfolio had returned something impressive, glancing at Elliot as he said the number as though checking whether it was impressive enough. Priya, my daughter-in-law, said very little directly to me. She asked Claire about her job. She asked Kevin about some policy initiative. She asked Elliot about the Phoenix market. She looked at me once, smiled the way you smile at a piece of furniture that is not quite in the right place, and looked away. I ordered soup and a club sandwich. Elliot ordered the rack of lamb, and a bottle of something from the Okanagan that I gathered was meant to be significant. "Robert, what are you up to these days?" Elliot asked at some point. The way you ask a question when you already know the answer, and the answer confirms something you suspected. "Same as always," I said. "Still the shop?" "Still the shop," I said. There it was, the shop. That word had been doing a lot of work in my family for 2 decades. When Margaret and I were married, she used it affectionately at first, then neutrally, then with a kind of quiet disappointment that eventually became the loudest sound in our house. The shop, as in not an office. Not a firm, not a company. The shop. The shop is what I have been calling it for so long that I almost forgot, for a while, what it actually was. Daniel poured himself more wine. He'd had 3 glasses by the time the main course arrived. I could see it in the way his posture shifted, the way the careful version of himself that he maintained for professional situations started to loosen and give way to the version that had grown up watching his mother be unhappy, and decided that the source of her unhappiness was me. "How's the shop, Dad?" He said it with a particular smile. The kind you learn to produce when you've been rehearsing your contempt for years and have finally found an audience you want to perform it for. "Fine," I said. "Still making those little wood things?" I looked at my son. He was a handsome young man. He had his mother's eyes and her appetite for the approval of people she considered more successful than herself. "I make furniture, Daniel," I said. Right, right," he nodded, swirling his wine. "Custom stuff. For individual clients." "For individual clients," I confirmed. "Cool. That's really cool, Dad." He said it the way you say something is cool when you find it deeply uncool. Priya touched his arm, not to stop him, to encourage him to continue. Elliot leaned back in his chair and made a sound that was approximately a laugh. "You know, Robert, I've always respected the craftsman mentality. There's something honest about it. Working with your hands. Not everyone's built for scale, and that's okay." I looked at him. "Not everyone needs to build at scale," I said pleasantly. The table shifted slightly. Elliot's smile stayed exactly where it was. It was after the plates were cleared, after Kevin had made a joke that no one laughed at, after the dessert menu had been passed around and Daniel had ordered something expensive and I had ordered tea, that it happened. Elliot was talking about a new project. Something in Calgary. He used phrases like exit strategy and anchor tenant and phased return. Daniel was leaning forward, nodding. Priya was watching Daniel nod. Margaret was resting her chin in her hand, looking at Elliot the way she used to look at the television when something she loved was on. "That's the thing," Elliot was saying. "Most people don't understand leverage. They think small. They protect what they have instead of using it to build something bigger. It's a mindset difference, really, between people who accumulate and people who create." He glanced at me when he said accumulate, just briefly, but Daniel caught it. Daniel turned to me. I could see him deciding to do it. I could see the wine in the audience and the long-accumulated desire to perform his rejection of me for people he wanted to impress. I watched him make the choice. "Dad," he said, "be honest. Do you ever regret it? The path you took?" "No," I said, because he put his hand flat on the table. "Claire and I grew up watching you just sort of settle. You had a good mind. Mom always said that. But you settled. You made things in a workshop and called it a career." And meanwhile, he gestured at Elliot. There were people out there actually building things. The table was very quiet. "Daniel," Claire said softly. "No, I mean it." He was looking at me now with something that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite pity. It was the expression of someone who has been carrying a verdict for years and finally feels entitled to deliver it. Elliot came from nothing and built a real legacy. Something with his name on it. "And you made chairs, Dad. Nice chairs, sure. But chairs. You spent 30 years making chairs. And we had to listen to Mom cry in the kitchen because she knew there was more out there and she was watching it pass her by because you were content to just—" "Daniel." Claire's voice was sharper now. "I'm just saying what everyone's thinking." He sat back. He looked briefly at Priya, who gave him a small, encouraging nod. He looked at his stepfather, who had the grace to examine his dessert plate. Then he looked back at me. "You had potential, Dad. You just never did anything with it. Elliot's done something with his life. You made chairs." The silence after that had a particular quality. It was the silence of a room waiting to see what a man does when he's been hit. I reached across the table. I picked up my cup of tea. I took a slow sip. I looked at my son. I looked at Margaret, who was looking at the window. I looked at Elliot, who was looking at his fork. I set my cup down. I took my jacket from the back of my chair. I stood up. I put the jacket on, one arm, then the other. I smoothed the lapels. "Thank you for dinner, Claire," I said. And I walked out. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't knock anything over. I didn't give Daniel the explosive reaction he was braced for, the one that would let him feel justified in what he'd just done. I just left. Outside, the October air in Ottawa was cold and clear, the way it gets in the fall when the summer is completely gone, and there's no pretending otherwise. I walked to where I'd parked, 2 blocks away on a side street. I didn't rush. The city was quiet. The leaves were down. I got into my vehicle. Not the 2009 Subaru that Daniel assumed I drove. That car existed. I kept it for certain occasions, the kind of occasions that had just concluded. I drove 4 minutes to a private lot near the glebe. I used a fob to open the gate. Inside, in a reserved bay, was a 2024 Land Rover Defender, custom spec, deep green, with a tan interior, every option available. I'd paid cash for it in July and driven it almost nowhere worth mentioning. I got in, the door sealed behind me with that particular quietness that costs money. The heated seat came on. I pressed the ignition. I sat there in the dark for a moment, looking at the parking garage wall. My son had just told a room full of people that I had wasted my life making chairs. I thought about that. I thought about 1994 when I started Callaway Workshop out of a rented garage in Canada with $12,000 I'd saved working construction. I thought about the first year when I worked 16-hour days and ate peanut butter sandwiches and called Margaret every night from a payphone because I couldn't afford a mobile plan. I thought about the first commission that mattered, a dining table for a couple in the glebe, walnut, hand-jointed, no hardware, 3 months of work. I thought about how, when it was done, I stood in their dining room, and the woman started to cry because it was exactly what she'd seen in her mind and never believed anyone could actually make. I thought about what happened after that. I thought about the architectural firms, the hotels, the government buildings, the private collections. I thought about the piece that was currently in a permanent installation at the National Gallery. I thought about the article in an American design magazine last year that called me, and I am quoting precisely, one of the most important living furniture makers in North America. I thought about the fact that no one in that restaurant knew any of this. I had let them not know. I had made a choice, years ago, when my marriage was ending and my children were teenagers, to keep the scale of what I'd built entirely private. I had watched, in the music world and the art world and the craft world, what happened to craftsmen who became famous, how the work got swallowed by the biography, how people stopped looking at the thing and started looking at the story of the person who made it. I wanted people to buy my furniture because it was worth buying, not because of me. And so I had stayed quiet. I had stayed in the workshop. I had continued to drive the old Subaru to family dinners and order the club sandwich and let the people who were supposed to love me build a version of me in their heads that was small enough to feel comfortable around. My son had just told me I made chairs. I sat in the dark garage and I thought about something my workshop manager, a man named Grant who had been with me for 18 years, had said to me once. He said, "Robert, at some point there's a difference between humility and permission." He was talking about pricing, but it applied to other things too. I drove home. Not to the house Margaret remembered from our marriage, which I'd sold 10 years ago. Home is a property on the Rideau River, 9 acres, the main house timber frame with floor-to-ceiling glass facing the water, a separate workshop building with a showroom attached, and a small guest cabin I sometimes rented to artists who needed quiet. I designed the main house myself, and built much of it with my own hands over 3 years. An architectural journal had run 6 pages on it in 2019. Margaret had never seen it. I poured a glass of whiskey. I sat in my reading chair by the window and I looked at the river in the dark. Then I picked up my phone and called Grant. He answered on the second ring. "How was dinner?" he said. He knew where I'd been. "My son told a room of people I wasted my life making chairs," I said. Grant was quiet for a moment. "Okay," he said. "I've been thinking," I said, "about the arrangement with Daniel." Another pause. Grant knew about the arrangement with Daniel because Grant handled all my company finances and had for 15 years. The arrangement with Daniel was something I had set up 5 years ago quietly and without Daniel's knowledge. When Daniel moved to Toronto and started talking about buying a condo, I discovered through a mutual acquaintance that he was over-leveraged and quietly desperate. He would never have asked me for help. His pride wouldn't allow it, and so I hadn't offered it openly. What I had done was establish a numbered company that held the mortgage on Daniel and Priya's condo in Liberty Village. The monthly payments were structured to appear as standard bank financing. The interest rate was below market by almost a full point, which Daniel had attributed to good timing and his own negotiating skill. The numbered company was wholly owned by Callaway Workshop Holdings. I had been, in effect, his landlord and his lender for 5 years. He had called me a chairmaker in front of his stepfather. "I want to call in the arrangement," I said. Grant exhaled slowly. "You want to trigger the balloon clause." "I want to trigger the balloon clause." The balloon clause in the mortgage agreement, buried in the standard documents that Daniel had signed without reading carefully, as people do when they believe they are getting a good deal, allowed the lender to call the full balance of the loan due within 60 days under specific conditions. One of those conditions was a material change in the financial circumstances of the guarantor. I was the guarantor, in the sense that the numbered company was, and a dissolution of the holding structure would qualify. Grant could handle the paperwork by morning. "There's also the gallery commission," I said. "The Renfrew piece." The Renfrew piece. 3 years ago, Daniel had asked me, almost casually, at a Christmas dinner whether I might be able to help him impress a client. The client was a man named Whitfield, who collected art and design objects. Daniel thought that if Whitfield visited his condo and saw an original Callaway piece, it might help Daniel's standing with him. Daniel had said this to me the way you ask a tradesman for a discount, assuming the favor costs little and the gratitude owed is correspondingly modest. I had made Whitfield a custom credenza. It had taken 4 months. It was one of the best things I had ever built. Whitfield had offered to buy it from Daniel for $40,000. Daniel had declined, because the credenza had become a kind of social credential for him in Toronto's collector circles, where the name Callaway, while not widely known among financiers, carries considerable weight among people who actually know things. Daniel had been dining out on that credenza for 3 years. "Contact the studio in New York," I said. "Confirm that they still want the piece for the November show. Then contact Daniel and let him know that the credenza is required for exhibition and will need to be retrieved." Grant was quiet for a moment. "He's going to fight that. He can check the paperwork," I said. "The piece was loaned, not gifted. The loan agreement is in the file." He signed it. I could hear Grant typing. "The shop car," I said. "The Subaru. The Subaru is registered to the workshop. He's been borrowing it when he visits Ottawa. I want it returned by the end of the month." "Done. Anything else?" I looked at the river. A light on the far bank was reflecting on the water in a long, broken line. "That's enough for tonight," I said. "Let's let it land first." Grant said good night. I sat with my whiskey in the river until about 2 in the morning. Then I went to bed and slept without any difficulty at all. The first call came on a Wednesday, 9 days later. It came from a number I didn't recognize in Toronto, which I let go to voicemail. The message was from a woman at a law firm, very professional, stating that she was calling on behalf of Daniel Callaway regarding a mortgage matter and asking me to return the call at my earliest convenience. I didn't return it. The second call came from Daniel himself the following Friday afternoon. I was in the workshop, planing a piece of white ash for a commission for a family in Minotic. I let it ring through. The voicemail was 4 minutes long. He started businesslike and got less so as the message went on. There was something wrong with his mortgage. There had to be an error. The lender was asking for the full balance within 60 days. He needed me to call him back immediately. I listened to the whole message twice. Then I set my phone down and went back to the white ash. I didn't call him back. On the Sunday, he called Claire. I know this because Claire called me 20 minutes after, which is how I know that whatever Daniel told her was alarming enough to make her contact me directly rather than through text. "Dad, what's going on with Daniel's mortgage?" "I'm not sure what you mean," I said. "He says the lender is calling in the loan. His whole mortgage. He has to pay the full amount in 60 days, or they'll start foreclosure." "That sounds stressful," I said. "Dad." "Claire, I'm afraid I can't speak to Daniel's mortgage situation. That's between him and his lender." A pause. "He thinks you have something to do with it." "Why would I have anything to do with it?" "Because the company holding the mortgage is somehow connected to your—" She stopped. "Dad, is the workshop holding Daniel's mortgage?" "I'd suggest Daniel review his loan documents," I said gently. "Good night, Claire." I heard her exhale before I ended the call. The call from Priya came 2 days after that. Priya was controlled and precise, and I had the impression she had written notes before dialing. "Robert," she said, "I want to be direct with you." "I'd appreciate that," I said. "We have 60 days to come up with $940,000, or we lose our home. We've looked into refinancing, but because the existing mortgage was below market, no standard lender will match the terms. We'd need a new appraisal, new underwriting, and the earliest we can close on anything is 14 weeks. We're 6 weeks short. That's a difficult situation, I said. Robert. A pause. I understand that what Daniel said at the dinner was it was inappropriate. He'd had too much wine and he was trying to impress Elliot, and he said something he shouldn't have. But surely you're not going to let us lose our home over one bad dinner. Priya, I said, I genuinely don't know what you think my connection to your mortgage situation is, but I'd encourage you both to speak to a financial advisor. She was quiet for a long time. The credenza, she finally said. They came for the credenza. It was a loan, I said. It was always a loan. Do you have any idea what it does to Daniel's credibility to have that piece removed? Whitfield was the one who connected him to half his current clients. The Callaway piece was part of that. You're pulling the ground out from under him. Daniel is a capable professional, I said. I'm sure he'll manage. She hung up. 2 days after that, late on a Thursday evening, my phone rang, and the name on the screen was one I hadn't expected. Margaret. I hadn't spoken to Margaret in almost 3 years. We communicated occasionally through Claire, and occasionally through the mutual logistical necessities of being the divorced parents of adult children, but I could count on one hand the number of direct conversations we'd had since she remarried. I answered. Robert? Her voice was different from the last time I'd heard it. There was something underneath it that I didn't immediately recognize, and then I did. It was the same sound I'd heard in Priya's voice. Control being applied to something that wanted not to be controlled. Margaret, I said, I'm calling because Daniel is in a very serious situation, and I don't think you fully understand what you're doing. Daniel is 38 years old, I said. I think he's capable of managing his own situations. Robert, Elliot offered to help. We offered Daniel a loan to cover the gap, the bridge financing. He declined it. I found that interesting. He declined Elliot's money? He said. She stopped. He said he wasn't going to take money from Elliot to solve a problem caused by his father, that it would be humiliating. I sat with that for a moment. Then it sounds like Daniel has made his choice, I said. Robert. Her voice changed. The control slipped slightly. What is going on? I looked up Callaway Workshop Holdings. I looked it up properly. I asked a lawyer friend to look into it. Do you understand what I found? I imagine you found a numbered holding company, I said. Robert. The revenue filings, the asset portfolio, the international distribution arrangements, She stopped. Robert, why have you never said anything? I looked out the window at the river. It was dark and moving, and it looked the way it always did, which was like something indifferent to everything on its banks. You never asked, I said. A long silence. I left you, she said slowly, because I thought you had no ambition. I know. And all this time, Margaret, I said, you didn't leave me because I lacked ambition. You left me because my ambition was quiet. You wanted someone whose ambition was visible. Elliot is very visible. I hope that's worked out. It has, she said, but there was something in her voice that made me think she was answering a different question than the one she thought I was asking. Is there something you needed? I said. I need you to help our son, she said. Our son told a room of people that I wasted my life, I said. He told them I made chairs. He said Elliot built something real, and I built nothing. He's been living in a building I owned for 5 years. He's been making payments to a company I created so he wouldn't have to come to me and ask for help, because I knew his pride wouldn't allow it. I did all of that quietly, and he sat at a table and told the world I was a wasted potential. Margaret was silent for a very long time. Robert, she finally said, very quietly. I know, I said. I didn't. When we were married, I didn't understand. It doesn't matter now, I said. But Daniel needs to figure some things out, I said. That's all that's happening here. He needs to figure some things out. I said good night and ended the call. I poured another whiskey. I didn't drink it. I just held it and looked at the river. The call I had been waiting for came on a Saturday afternoon, 22 days after the dinner. I was in the showroom adjacent to the workshop, where I keep a rotating selection of completed pieces. A woman from Edmonton had come to look at a dining table. We'd been talking for an hour. She was precise about what she wanted and knowledgeable enough to ask the right questions, which I always appreciate. My phone buzzed. I excused myself and stepped outside. It was Daniel, not a voicemail this time. A live call. I answered. Dad. His voice was different. Every layer of the performance that had been present at the dinner was gone. What was left was the voice of a 38-year-old man sitting with a problem he couldn't solve by being impressive. Hello, Daniel, I said. I need to talk to you. Go ahead. A pause. In person. I'm in Ottawa. I drove up this morning. Can I come to the He stopped? Where do you live now? I've been going to the old address. I've lived here for 8 years, I said. I gave him the address. 40 minutes later, a rental car pulled into my drive. I watched from the workshop window as Daniel got out. He was wearing the kind of casual clothes that people in finance wear on weekends, expensive but designed to read as relaxed. He looked older than he'd looked at the dinner, less assembled. He stood in the drive and looked at the main house. He looked at the workshop. He looked at the showroom. He looked at the view of the river through the birch trees. I came out of the workshop and walked toward him. He turned. He looked at me the way people look at someone they thought they knew when they realize they don't. There is no other expression quite like it. Dad, he said. Daniel, I said. Come in. I brought him into the showroom. I watched him walk slowly through it. He looked at the pieces without touching them. He was quiet for a long time. There was a dining table in the center of the room, maple and black walnut, 8 feet. Legs that had taken me 2 weeks to get right. There were chairs around it that had been commissioned for a hotel in Montreal. There was a cabinet against the far wall that was waiting for delivery to a home in West Vancouver, the kind of home where things like that cabinet end up. Daniel stopped in front of a small side table near the window. He looked at it for a long time. It was a simple piece. Cherry wood, tapered legs, one drawer with a hand-cut dovetail joint. You could only see if you opened it. I had made it 20 years ago as a demonstration piece and kept it because I liked it. I remember this, he said quietly. It was in the front hall when you were growing up, I said. He was quiet. How much, he said, is the workshop worth? That's not a question I'm going to answer, I said. He nodded. He ran his hand along the edge of the maple table, carefully, the way you touch something when you're trying to understand it. I owe you an apology, he said. Yes, I said. He looked at me. Dad, he stopped. He looked at the table. I have spent years thinking I understood what you were, what your life was. I built a whole story about you and Mom and why you weren't, why things went the way they did. And Elliot was there and he was everything I thought you weren't. And I think I said things at that dinner that He stopped again. Daniel, I said, I know where it came from. I understand the shape of it. That doesn't mean it was acceptable. No, he said, it wasn't. We stood in the showroom in the quiet. Outside, the Rideau River moved past in the afternoon light, gray and unhurried. I can't refinance in time, he said. I've talked to 3 lenders. The gap is too big. Elliot offered a bridge loan and I said no. And I'd say no again. I won't take money from him. But I have 40 days left. I know how many days you have left, I said. He looked at me. What do you want from me, Daniel? I said. Not what do you need financially. What do you actually want from me? He was quiet for a long time. The light shifted. A truck went by on the road outside. I want you to know that I'm sorry, he said. Not because of the mortgage. I mean the mortgage matters. I won't pretend it doesn't. But I'm sorry because I sat at that table and I told everyone you were nothing. And you were. He stopped. You've been holding my house together for 5 years and I didn't know. And before that you built this. And I never asked. I never asked because I'd already decided. And he shook his head. That's something I have to live with. I looked at my son, the 38-year-old man who had his mother's eyes and a great deal more of my stubbornness than he knew. The mortgage arrangement will continue, I said. The terms will change slightly. The interest rate will be adjusted to market. You'll receive the revised documents from Grant's office this week. Daniel looked at me. Something moved across his face that I recognized as relief, but there was something complicated underneath it. The credenza stays in New York, I said. The show runs until February. After that, we can discuss whether the loan is renewed or the piece returns to you. That's a conversation for February. He nodded. And Daniel, I said, I want you to understand something. Not for my sake, for yours. He waited. What you've been building your confidence on the condo, the connections. Whitfield's regard for you, some of that has rested on things you didn't earn and didn't know you didn't earn. That's not your fault. That's mine. I should have let you build from scratch. I thought I was protecting you from difficulty. What I was actually doing was making it impossible for you to know what you were genuinely capable of. He was very still. So here is what I want, I said. I want you to spend the next year figuring out which parts of your professional life are yours. Actually yours. And then I want you to come back and tell me what you found. Can you do that? He looked at me for a long moment. Then he said, yes. We shook hands. It was a strange thing to do with your son, but it seemed like the right register for what had just happened. Less than a reconciliation, more than a transaction. Something more like the beginning of two people deciding to be honest with each other for the first time. He stayed for dinner. I made pasta. We didn't talk about the mortgage or Elliot or the dinner. We talked about the workshop. He asked questions I had never heard him ask. What is the wood for the commission in Minotic? How long does it take? How do you decide what to charge for something that took a year of your life? I answered him. For the first time in a long time, I answered him plainly, and he listened. He drove back to Toronto the next morning. Before he left, he stood in the driveway again and looked at the house and the river. Dad, he said, why didn't you ever tell us any of this? I thought about how to answer that. I wanted the work to be enough on its own terms, I said. I didn't want anyone's respect because of what I owned, or what the balance sheet said. I wanted, if anyone respected it, for it to be because they understood what it took, because they'd looked at it closely enough to understand. He was quiet. The problem, I said, is that some people won't look closely at anything unless you put it in front of them and make them. He nodded slowly. He got in the car. He drove down the lane and turned onto the road and disappeared into the birch trees. I went back into the workshop. The white ash was waiting. The commission for Minotic was 3 weeks away. I had a lot to do. I put on my apron. I picked up my plane. I went to work. What I have learned in 64 years of making things is that the people who mistake silence for emptiness are making an error that is entirely their own. I am not responsible for what people choose not to look at. I am only responsible for what I build, and how well I build it, and whether it lasts. The work lasts. That was always the point. If you've ever had your worth measured by someone who never bothered to understand it, I want you to remember something. What they see when they look at you is limited by what they're willing to look for. That's their limitation, not yours. Don't defend yourself. Don't explain yourself. Just keep building. Subscribe if this story found you at the right time. And if you've been underestimated by the people who should have known better, tell me about it in the comments below. I want to hear from you.